Chair Rocha, you can go ahead and start. We are live.
I call to order this meeting of the Audit and Compliance Committee of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to those who are joining us via the live stream video. Before we turn to our agenda, I'd like to welcome our student representatives. We have Emily Whitcott and Riel Pertu Swanson. Thank you both for being here, and look forward to your participation as you see fit. And we'll turn to our first item of business. First on the agenda is the External Auditor's Review of Completed Audit Work. This is for discussion on items 1 and 2. And we're joined today by Katie Knudsen and Judy Dockendorf from Deloitte for our first 2 items. Nice to see you both again. And our first item is the External Auditor's Review of Completed Audit Work. Controller Sue Paulson is also here. Controller Paulson, would you care to kick us off?
Good morning, Chair Rocha and committee members. Before I turn the presentation over to Deloitte, I would like to just take a moment to provide a couple of quick remarks. At the December board meeting, I shared details about the life cycle of the engagements, and I used the financial statements as the example. For the engagements and the reports before you today, we used the same processes and procedures as the financial statements in terms of planning meetings, kickoff meetings. We use the same process all the way through report issuance. And while on paper or in presentation, the engagement and the reports might seem similar to you year over year, in fact, they are very different. Not only is the university team that's involved for each one of these engagements and reports different, the underlying report itself and the information for completing that report and the auditor's guidance come and originate from different sources. So for example, for the scheduled expenditures of federal awards, the reporting and audit standards are set forth in Title II of the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations, Part 200, Uniform Administrative Requirements for Federal Awards, lovingly shortened to Uniform Guidance or UG, and the accompanying compliance supplements, which typically come out in the spring each year. This year, there were 2 releases for the CFAR. One was in August, and it was a mere 1,500 pages. And in December, there was a second release, an addendum, which was 118 pages. And that December release was primarily around reporting requirements and audit testing guidance related to CARES funding. So for each one of the engagements and reports before you today, while it might seem the process we use and the presentation today and maybe some of the reports look similar year over year, everything that goes into it in most cases does change a little bit year over year from the originating sources for the that are requesting that we issue these reports and have them audited year over year. And again, the reports before you today are a culmination of months of collective effort by both the university and Deloitte. And the reports are truly a reflection of the university's control environment, which includes such things as policies, procedures, systems, approvals, oversight activities, report preparation, etc. And with that, Chair Rocha, I end my remarks and I turn it over to Deloitte for their report.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Ms. Paulson, and good morning, Regent Rocha. Sue did an excellent job in terms of describing the work that we perform, and I'll say the second phase of our work. We're here to really cover 2 things. First is our presentation of the results of those additional audit and assurance services that we provide, the uniform grant guidance, which is the audit of the federal awards, the procedures that we do over that are required by the Office of Higher Education for every single campus, and then also the agreed upon procedures work that we do that's required for all Division I schools by the NCAA. So we'll go through those in detail. All of the reports, to Ms. Paulson's point, there's 127 pages of it. Our presentation doesn't actually start until 128 pages. So clearly a lot of work goes into that on both sides to issue those reports. Once Ms. Dockendorf is complete in terms of walking through the results of that second phase of work, then I'll go through. We've already been planning our client service plan and for this upcoming year. We talked before, there was discussion before we started about our engagement letter. And so we're ready to hit the ground running with the fiscal, 21 audit. So I'll go through our client service plan, how we think about risks and things like that. And then we certainly along the way can take some questions. So I will turn it over to Ms. Stockendorf.
Please.
Good morning, Chair Rocha and members of the committee. If you could move forward to slide 4. Thank you. So here we'll start with the Uniform Grant Guidance or the Federal Compliance Audit. As Ms. Paulson mentioned, you can see this is driven by Title II of the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations. This is an audit that we do perform annually for the university over federal expenditures. And you can see here we've noted that in fiscal 20, the university had just over $1 billion in federal expenditures across a number of programs. The university does continue to qualify as a low-risk auditee. This is a result of timely audits that are completed and those audits being completed without significant findings or instances of material noncompliance in them. If you could move forward. In the current year, we tested 6 major programs. Those are listed for you here along with the dollar value of the expenditures in fiscal 20. On an annual basis, we have continued to look at research and development and the student financial assistant clusters, given the size there. And then in the current year, as Ms. Paulson mentioned, there were additional requirements related to CARES Act dollars that have been received and expended by the university. So you see that here in the Education Stabilization Fund we've identified of about $8.3 million in expenditures. Those dollars represent the amounts that were refunded to students through the CARES Act dollars that were received by the university. In the university's financial statements that we issued our opinion on in October, you would have seen that there was actually about $16.8 million in CARES revenue recognized by the university. So that includes both the student amount here that was refunded and then the institutional portion that was used to offset lost revenues the university saw. The institutional portion is not included in the expenditure amounts that we audited for the federal grant guidance audit. Our procedures on the programs, once they're identified, include performing both tests of compliance as well as tests of internal controls specific to the programs. We issued unmodified opinions on each of the major programs, and as you can see here, identified no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, instances of noncompliance, or findings or question costs. So great controls over all of these. There was obviously additional work considering how COVID impacted the various programs during the year, and then the specific testing on the Education Stabilization Act. If you could move forward. As Ms. Knudsen mentioned, we also performed an examination related to state grants that students receive. Our testing here involves making selections of students and assessing whether or not they were eligible for the grants that they have received and that amounts received were also appropriate. We actually issue 4 separate reports, one for each campus. Those reports were issued in January, and there were no findings identified for any of the campuses. You can move forward. Additionally, on an annual basis, we perform agreed upon procedures for the Twin Cities Athletics Department. These procedures are driven by guidelines put out by the NCAA for all Division I institutions. Those procedures involve us making selections of revenue and expenses recorded during the year, any capital assets or debt that are obligations of the Twin Cities Athletics Department, an understanding of activity with affiliated organizations or the booster clubs for the Twin Cities Athletics Department, and then also looking at internal controls, so ensuring that when payments are made, they're reviewed, when sales happen of tickets, that there are appropriate policies and procedures in place. Our report was issued in December 2020. And we did identify one exception related to equivalency value testing that was corrected by the university when it was identified in November. And once that correction was made, there was no impact to the maximum equivalency limit. So the Twin Cities campus was still in compliance. They just needed to make one update. If you could move forward. We also perform agreed upon procedures every 3 years for the Crookston and Duluth campuses. So fiscal 20 was Crookston's year to be in scope from a procedure perspective. So in addition to Division I procedures, the NCAA also lays out procedures for Division II institutions. You can see the procedures I've listed here that we perform. They're less in scope given the size of the Division II institutions as compared to the Division I institutions, but obviously encompass testing of revenue and expense transactions where we spend a lot of our time. Our report here was also issued in December 2020, and 2 exceptions were identified, both related to in-kind donations that were recorded as revenues on the schedule put together by the Crookston campus. One, they were unable to support a donation amount, and then in another instance, the amount that was recorded was more than they could support from more than they could substantiate from the support that we could see. Both of those items were corrected and resulted in a reduction in in-kind donations reported on the statement of revenue and expenses. That's our comments here for wrapping up any of the remaining 2020 work that we had. So we'd be happy to answer any questions before Ms. Knutson moves into the fiscal 21 plan.
Do we have any questions or comments from members of the committee before we proceed? And certainly I would expect that people that they have questions after the meeting, we can put them forward and you'd be willing to respond that way as well?
Absolutely.
All right. I'm not seeing any questions. Ms. Palmer, any indicators of questions? Here?
No, I don't see any.
Thank you very much. Ms. Knutson, you may proceed.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. So as I mentioned, Ms. Dockendorf just went through the final results of our additional assurance services. Now we turn to planning for our fiscal 21 audit. The materials start on page 138 of the docket, but if you want to turn to slide 4 or page 141, we'll start there with our client service plan. One of the things we're approaching a year in this COVID work from home environment, which is crazy. But as we talked about this fall, the University of Minnesota's fiscal 2020 audit was performed entirely virtual and went really, really well. And from an execution perspective. And so I just wanted to highlight here, we will continue to move forward with the same approach. I mean, certainly we are monitoring the work from home requirements and will obviously follow your lead in terms of returning to work. But our investments over the last several years in technology and truly digitizing our audit has really made the execution of this work streamlined. And it's everything from project management, collecting in a secure environment information, using technology to cover 100% of transactions, for example. So we're super proud of the investments that we've made, and it really has supported our ability to be able to shift to a virtual work environment and continue to do high quality audit work in every aspect of the projects that we work with the university on. Slide 4 or page 142 of your materials is our Deloitte audit approach. You've seen this before. It is a risk-based approach that is led by myself and Ms. Dockendorf. If you want to move to the next slide. it is a risk-based approach that we lead our teams in terms of determining our areas of focus, and that goes to everything from the consolidated financial statements to Ms. Dockendorf just walked through the federal expenditures and the programs that are in scope. Truly a risk-based approach, leveraging technology and information from the organization as we go through that process. We obviously then develop our audit plan and go through our execution and then report back to you any the results of our work and if there are any findings. On the next slide, slide 6 or 143, is a reminder of the scope of our work. As Ms. Paulson said, obviously the scope is consistent as it is with many of our audit engagements each year. But certainly the groups of individuals at the institution are different in terms of who we're working with as we move through our work. You can see on the left the different reports. Ms. Dockendorf just walked through everything starting with the UMB uniform grant guidance down to the NCAA, which Duluth will be in scope this upcoming year. She just mentioned Crookston, and we will we rotate those on an every 3-year basis, and Duluth will be in scope in this upcoming year. Off to the right of that slide, sorry, one more thing. Off to the right of that slide, one thing that we want to continue to remind the committee is the level of assurance that we provide in our assurance work, our audit work. And so the first 4, you will see those are full audits with full assurance. The last 2 are agreed upon procedures, which are on a limited basis, and it is essentially us getting a list of procedures from the NCAA and making selections, and it's really sort of a black or white, yes or no, do things agree. Pretty straightforward work, but something that is, as Ms. Dockendorf mentioned, required by schools in athletics, both Division I and Division II. On slide 7 and 144 is our significant risk. We've talked about these. These have been, consistent at the university for several years. Certainly, this is something that we look at every single year. And if there were something, some event, some transaction that occurred in the current year that we needed to heighten our risk about, that would be added to this list. But our significant risk, as we've identified now, is first management override of control. That is a significant risk at every single one of our clients and is required by professional standards. There's not something at the university that heightens that risk, but it's really focusing on internal controls over financial reporting and making sure that we're comfortable that there aren't instances where management has the ability or has overridden the internal control framework at the university. And then valuation of investments. We've talked about that previously, but the university, as is very common in higher education and not-for-profits, has a very significant portfolio of what we call alternative investments, which are difficult to value. Those are investments that are not like if you were to invest in Microsoft, for example. So it's hedge funds, it's fund of funds, and they're a little bit more difficult to value. So we've increased our risk around that and have increased our procedures around that portfolio of investments. Certainly, if anything needs to be added to this list as we go through, we certainly will come back and make sure that we communicate that to this committee. On slide 8 and 145 is our timeline. As you recall, we accelerated our time this last year. We will continue to work towards that acceleration, but this timeline is very consistent with what we've done in the past with our planning and finalizing our risk assessment here in April. The last thing I'll just touch on, as sad as I am to say, this upcoming year is my last year serving the university. On slide 9, the next slide, and 146, we have required partner rotation years of service internally at our firm. And we do that to really make sure from an independence perspective that we're not in situations where we have professionals serving clients for a long period of time, and really take this process seriously. So I am going to be in my 10th year here this upcoming year, and we'll be finalizing the 2021 audit. We're working with management in terms of our rotation plan, but you will see the other, I'll say, engagement leaders. These are people that are managing directors and above, so partners and non-equity partners, is where this requirement exists. And we have a number of individuals that support our work. Ms. Dockendorf is obviously on the phone and well into her rotation. We also have an IT partner that has also been serving the university for a number of years. And then there are a couple of what we call non-rotating roles. Those are roles where the amount of time that is spent, on the engagement and frankly client contact and those sorts of things just are not all that significant. One being our second partner reviewer. That is something that is a quality review function that is, I would say, kind of an overriding review of myself and Ms. Dockendorf's work. That is a non-rotating role. And then Christina Rasmussen is our tax reviewer, but obviously the institution is not a taxable organization, and the amount of work that she does here at the university is very small. So we will keep the university posted on our process and our plan for next year. We're working very closely with management on this, but certainly wanted to highlight that for this upcoming year as we go through an orderly transition.
Thank you. I see that we have one hand up. If you people have questions, please use the raise hand feature or alert Ms. Flatten if you'd like to speak. I turn to Regent Powell. Regent Powell, I think your mute may be on momentarily.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Chair Rosa. Just a quick question for Ms. Knudsen and Dockendorf. Thank you for making it clear the rotation procedures and that you'll be moving off in 2021, and goes without saying you'll be missed. We'll talk more about that in the future. But can you just maybe make a few more comments on how that transition will work, overlap and that sort of thing? I mean, it is a really important, you're in an important role, and I just want to make sure that we've got the right kind of sort of transition and coverage to move through that smoothly.
Excellent question, Regent Powell. Ms. Knudsen.
Regent Rocha, Regent Powell, very good question. So we will work with the university in terms of who my successor will be, and we will go through a process. Some clients choose to do an interview process. Some clients, because of their historical working with individuals, do not require an interview process. I have been talking to Mr. Volna and Ms. Paulson on this topic for about a year, and we're going to be kicking that off here this spring. And then the plan will be my successor will be in place, and we'll confirm that to you before we wrap up this 2021 audit.
Thank you. Regent Powell.
I'm good, Chair Rocha. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other questions or comments? Again, please indicate by using the raise hand feature. I don't see any at this time. Ms. Flatten, am I missing any?
Mr. Chairman?
Please, Regent Sviggum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I apologize. I'm looking for my raise hand feature and it's not appearing, or at least figuring it out anyway. Mr. Chairman, if I could just real quickly, and I hope this not to be a loaded question, but I sit here knowing that sometimes I have difficulty reconciling my credit card and my personal checking account. And my wife and I sometimes have a little difficulty with that as to what's pending, what's not, where we're at. And if I could have, Ms. Dockendorf, and I hope this not to be loaded, Ms. Dockendorf, but you're dealing with audits of not a few thousand, but millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. And I'm very impressed that we have no material findings of non-compliance, except for those maybe two small in-kind contributions at Crookston. I think you mentioned those two. Is that unusual? I don't want this to be a loaded question, but I think the university is operating pretty well and in compliance almost 100%. Am I wrong? Give us a rating. Are we at 95%? Are we at 100%? Are we getting an A+? Give me some type of rating, if you would, that kind of for us, laymen.
A rating from Ms. Dockendorf, please.
Chair Rocha, Regent Sviggum. I'm not sure we're in the business of giving ratings, but you're right. There's significant dollars going through those programs, and we did see just the couple instances at Crookston. But as Ms. Paulson mentioned when she kicked off too, there's a very sound, control environment here at the university. And given the size of those dollars, I think there is that additional focus. We see the understanding of how important being in compliance with federal grant dollars is to the university, and that non-compliance could impact, additional funds to be received in the future, that those programs are very well controlled within the sponsored financial reporting group, within student financial assistance. And, from what we've seen from the programs in scope each year, it's going really well. And, I'm looking to Katie to see if she wants me to give a grade, but it's going well. We haven't seen issues, and there's good controls in place.
Regent Sviggum.
Ms. Dockendorf, without your letter grade rating and without your B+ or A- or wherever we're at, I take a great deal of comfort and insurance, both comfort and insurance in your report regarding compliance. Should I do that? I mean, I feel very comforted. Am I correct in that, at least from my position?
Ms. Dockendorf?
Chair Rocha and Regent Sviggum, yes, I think you should feel very comfortable in that. We spend a significant amount of time understanding the programs, understanding where the university is spending money, and that the appropriate controls are in place. We test both controls and a number of selections from a compliance perspective, and things have gone very well the last number of years.
No. Thank you for putting it at my level, Ms. Dockendorf. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And Regent Sviggum, in our conversations and docket review, Regent Kenyanya and I have had that discussion. On the one hand, there's a comfort in finding things, knowing that you're finding them, but on the other hand, there's comfort in not finding things because you are doing things right. And so certainly when something hits the news wire that there's been an issue, it's startling. But at the same time, I think with the thoroughness that this is being conducted, I take a level of comfort, but always being mindful that it's a gigantic institution with billions of dollars, and there will be things, and trying to wrap one's head around the extent of these audits is a challenge. So, but obviously, if we have specific questions or general questions like yours, this is a good opportunity to ask. So, appreciate you raising that question. Further questions or comments from the committee? And you can just wave your hand if you want, Regent Sviggum or anyone else, and I'll try to identify that there's a question. I'm not seeing any. We're doing very well on time, if I'm not mistaken, Ms. Flatten. Seeing no further questions, thank you very much for that, the presentation, Ms. Knutson, Ms. Dockendorf.
Thank you, Chair Rocha. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Well, we'll move to item number 3. And that brings us to our third item, an update on the University Ethics Program. I hope Mr. Coomer is here. Yep, you see him on the list here. He's Chief Compliance Officer Boyd Coomer. Welcome, Mr. Coomer, and you may proceed when you are prepared.
Thank you, Chair Rocha. And I think my presentation should be coming up here. Okay, so again, thank you, Chair Rocha and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today and give you an update on the university's ethics program and the Office of Institutional Compliance. I first presented on this topic to this committee in December of 2018, and steady progress has been made since then to bring us to where we are today. Next slide, please. So my objectives for this presentation include providing you with a history of the effort to add an ethics component to the Office of Institutional Compliance, and to provide you with an update on the development of ethics programming. Next slide, please. I believe that the history of this effort is important to share with you. The work that was done leading up to the development of the program evolved our thinking on the idea of organizational ethics. In 2015, the president, then President Gable, President Kaler charged the chief auditor, the general counsel, and the president's chief of staff to assess the structure of the existing compliance program at the university and make recommendations to improve both its effectiveness and its visibility within the institution. In May of 2016, this team provided the president with a report that the university does in fact have an effective compliance program, but there were a few areas that were, the program was an outlier when compared to our peers. And one area in particular was the lack of any formal institutional ethics programming. Next slide, please. Another recommendation made by this team included creating the chief compliance officer position, reporting to the president, and I was fortunate enough to be the one to fill that position in October of 2016. And in 2017, I began work to define the ethics framework through internal discussions that included the president, the chair of the Audit and Compliance Committee at that time, and many other key internal stakeholders. The work didn't stop there, however, and external discussions were held with peers and compliance organizations, such as the Minnesota Chief Compliance Officer Network, which includes chief compliance officers from companies with well-established ethics programs, such as General Mills and Target, the Big Ten Chief Compliance Officer Network, and in particular, extensive discussion with Penn State's Chief Compliance Officer about the work they had done to create an ethics program at their institution. And the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics, which is an international compliance organization that is conveniently headquartered here in the Twin Cities, and the opportunity to sit down with the president of that organization and talk through the idea of adding an ethics component to our program. We also performed a review of literature and documents. This included working with the university archivist in a review of stated organizational values and guiding principles. And then in addition, we did an external review of the literature as well. So next slide, please. So in March of 2018, we obtained a charge from the Executive Oversight Compliance Committee to move forward with establishing a university ethics program. This was based on a framework that was developed from all of that prior work. This charge included defining ethics for the purpose of this program as behaving in a manner consistent with our values. The committee asked that 4 to 5 values to guide ethical decision-making and ethical behavior be identified through discussion with a wide range of university stakeholders, and then that these values be promoted through employee training and messaging. The charge also included developing tools to routinely assess and monitor the ethical culture of the institution and to establish the program as a university resource. So next slide, please. In December of 2019, after extensive consultation with university stakeholders, the following 5 values were approved by the Executive Oversight Compliance Committee and President Gable to be foundational for the program. Integrity, defined as honesty and consistency. Stewardship, defined as careful and responsible management of university resources. Transparency, defined as acting with honesty and openness. Accountability, defined as accepting responsibility for actions and behaviors. And respect, defined as due regard for the well-being and rights of individuals and the university. I believe it is important to be clear that these are not a list of core values for the institution. Instead, they are meant to be a foundation for guiding faculty, staff, and students and other community members when making decisions on behalf of the university. I think it is also important to point out that they are not the only values or standards that should be applied. In fact, there are many other sources of values and standards that should be considered, and we'll talk through some of those on the next slide. So next slide, please. So standards and values that apply to the everyday work that we do at the university can be found in a number of places. The Board of Regents Policy Code of Conduct contains guiding principles and standards of conduct. I mentioned discussions that I had with colleagues at other institutions and companies. For many, their organization's code of conduct was at the core of their compliance and ethics program. Moving on from the code of conduct, there are policies that provide important guidance. Some examples include the conflict of interest, outside consulting, HR and finance policies, brand and privacy, and a number of others. There are also ethics standards that should be applied to certain areas of activity, such as research. Of course, when we think of research, we often think of the IRB, Protection of Human Subjects and federal standards. And we don't want to forget the professional standards. Excuse me. I woke up this morning with a bit of a cold. And we don't want to forget the professional standards by discipline. So doctors, which I apparently need right now, nurses, lawyers, engineers, accountants, pharmacists, and the list goes on. And next slide, please. I'm sorry, next slide. So it appears to be frozen. I'll continue. So in December of 2019, we added ethics information. In 2019, we added ethics information to the Office of Institutional Compliance's webpage. In 2020, we established an email to be used for ethics questions. And in 2021, we have presented our first ethical decision-making session to the Office of Internal Audit staff. Our goal is to offer regular training sessions to the campus community, both through online workshops and in person, of course, after the COVID restrictions are lifted. And the next step is to develop a framework for the assessment and monitoring of university ethics. Eventually, the monitoring will allow us to target the training and messaging to the areas that need it most. And keep in mind that this training is supplemental. There is a lot of core training that takes place, topic specific, conflict of interest training, privacy training at the institution are just a couple of examples. So next slide, please. So this does conclude my prepared remarks. With this update, I'm happy to hear your questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coomer. Do we have questions or comments from members of the committee? Yes, Regent Davenport, please.
Thank you, Chair Rocha, and thank you for that presentation. I think this is an excellent program. I have two questions. I'll just name them and then you can go on. If there's an investigation and it concludes with a finding, will this program oversee next steps for individuals to get the training? Is that internal training or external, or do you see kind of a blend for that if there's those kind of next steps? And then do you have training goals for participation? So depending on the category, as you mentioned, you have different categories. Are there goals for the percent of staff, employees, faculty, whatever, to participate? Thanks.
Yes, Mr. Coomer.
Thank you, Chair Rocha, Regent Davenport. Great questions. So to the investigation question, often when an investigation is conducted, even if there are not findings of non-compliance, one of the opportunities that presents itself is to provide additional education to the area. Perhaps while there was no non-compliance, there was a culture that needed to be enhanced, whether that was through communication between supervisors and employees, or a look at policies and procedures. So training and education is a tool that we use very often. And more directly to your question, when we find non-compliance, it's something that is considered as well. This training could be used. It could be part of that moving forward as we enhance our ethics training program and develop a more refined training, topic-specific training to suit those needs. So yes, it is possible, but I want to say that training is already a remedy that the institution uses, and not necessarily from my office. Quite often, provided by Human Resources and EEOA, by the way. Training goals for participation and all of our different training activities that take place through the institution certainly exist. We have areas where we really strive for 100% compliance because there's a mandate to do so. HIPAA training is a great example if you're involved in clinical care or handle patient information. HIPAA training, so that privacy piece of healthcare, is a required training. Conflict of interest training for individuals who are on NIH grants, for example, is also required training. So we push that towards 100%. And then, and this is training owned by many different stakeholders in the institution, but they all set their metrics and strive to reach them every year.
Thank you. Regent Davenport?
No, thank you. No further questions. I appreciate your work.
Thank you.
I've got two others. I guess I apologize, I didn't catch the order. We'll go to Regent Powell, then Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair Rocha, and thank you, Mr. Coomer, for your work in this area. It really is advancing, and it's much appreciated. The question I have really is if maybe a little bit of clarification on the scope. I guess it seems to me that these values, you can see how they'd be so critical for those in kind of financial fiduciary positions, any sort of decision-making authority. So employees, I understand that. You mentioned the application to students, and I'm wondering if you just maybe clarify. I think that's good, but if you can clarify, how these values, the application or interpretation of their use for students, and how training, might be advanced against our student population.
Thank you, Regent Powell. Mr. Coomer.
Thank you, Chair Rocha, Regent Powell. Student involvement was part of developing these set of values to be used for ethical decision making. On one of the slides in the presentation, I think I omitted verbally referencing it, but there is a student code of conduct as well. So there is the possibility that moving forward, and particularly when there are circumstances of students not following the code of conduct, that our office could be supplemental. These values could be supplemental in any of the training that's provided to those individuals. Of course, this would also impact, our training would also potentially impact student workers at the institution, and any student groups that wanted to hear the presentation or participate in the presentation would be welcome as well. I mean, what I am anticipating is having open workshops that are available, as well as unit or department specific training sessions, but just having general open workshops to cover this material and to work through real life scenarios with individuals. And that's what we learned is one of the best ways to have a positive impact with the training is applying real world scenarios and then letting people talk through them, because applying these values it's interesting to see the process that individuals go through, because not only do they have these values, each group has its, like as I mentioned as well, its own individual values inherent to the type of work that they're doing or the type of professional that they are, and so those come into play as well.
Well, thank you, Mr. Coomer, and I would agree that case studies are very appropriate, for the values, teaching people about values. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Regent Hsu, followed by Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Coomer. The board in 2015 before we programs. Can you guys hear me?
You're kind of cutting out. Give it a try.
Okay, as I was saying, having joined the board in 2015 and not having a compliance program at the time, and then having the president start the compliance program, I guess, development process in 2015, I'm a little bit concerned that we're at 2021 now, and it doesn't sound like we're really doing any training yet. And I'm wondering, what are our plans for this? Since that time, we've also kind of put in place mandatory training for sexual assault, sexual harassment. And we are tracking that, I believe. But what are we doing in this area in terms of tracking whether or not people are participating? It doesn't sound like we're really started yet in terms of training, but what are we doing in tracking what people are doing up until now? Thank you.
Mr. Coomer.
Thank you, Chair Rocha and Regent Hsu. So it is correct that the training for ethics based on these values is starting now. Compliance training has been happening at the institution. Compliance with an ethics component has been happening at the institution, just not directly from my office. So conflict of interest training, HIPAA training, all of these different trainings do have an ethics element to them. This is something that we learned, again, as our idea of organizational ethics evolved through our discussions and the work that we did. Values-based decision-making is part of it. Understanding university policies and procedures is part of it. Again, those standards for, say, research conduct and the training that the IRB does through the city program is part of it. The training that comes down from our finance department is all part of it. So this is a more focused lesson on how to take these values that were agreed upon by consensus at the university to be foundational to decision making and applying them to scenarios. But it's very important to acknowledge that there's an awful lot of other training that's taking place in support of this. And it is true that we had a system-wide rollout of training to prevent harassment and sexual harassment and discrimination. I think that was a wonderful effort. There's very few things that we make mandatory at the institution in terms of training. HIPAA, as I mentioned before, being one of them. That training, one of them. So it doesn't mean, though, that individuals aren't interested in participating in the training. When we roll out the training and we have the workshops open for individuals, our plan is to track attendance over time to see what areas we're able to go and meet with and deliver the training, and start with those individuals who and leaders who have a clear interest in the training, allow us to refine it, get their feedback, and then based on that monitoring piece that I mentioned, as we monitor our compliance and ethics over time, we'll be able to identify areas that need the training. So, perhaps areas that have an uptick in university U reports, for example, or areas that have other issues occurring that we find out through discussion with OHR or EOAA. Those would be areas that we could then target with the training. So I think the training is a fantastic tool to have to not only provide proactively, but also to be able to go into areas that need some help, where there's an opportunity for improvement in this area, and share it with them.
Thank you. Regent Hsu, follow up?
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just two quick follow-ups. One is, how much time will this training take? How will it be delivered? And then regarding that ethics consult email, how many emails are you getting on that?
Mr. Kumar.
So the training, we're targeting 60 minutes for a training session, and would anticipate that we can stick with that. In particular, when we're addressing an area because of a particular concern, our idea is that we'll be able to tailor the training as needed to that area or that concern, while still providing that broad sort of overview on values-based decision making. In terms of the ethics, I think that's a great question. Well, we have had a number of questions coming through that line, but our office has historically been used as a point of contact. People contact me directly. People contact other individuals in my office directly with questions all of the time. So putting the ethics email link on our webpage, and then our plan is to also promote that through the training, is just another area for individuals to report. But we are already, I believe, seen as a university resource and contacted very frequently.
Thank you. We'll turn to Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Mr. Coomer. Just two brief questions, and I guess some of them were answered before, or alluded to, I should say. My first one's about if and how we're involving faculty or the academic side in the generation of this. I imagine we have a lot of expertise there. I just did a quick search on our course catalog and typed in ethics, and there's a whole bunch of courses, and so I imagine wonder if we're using the expertise of these faculty teaching these courses to either develop and deliver the program. And then my second question was on the system-wide scope of this program. I guess the first part is there system-wide scope? And if there is, how are we co-developing, the program with partners across the system? And then also, what's the delivery looking like across the system?
Mr. Coomer.
All right. Well, thank you, Chair Rocha and Regent Kenyanya. All great questions. If I can track all of them and answer them. In terms of what was the faculty involvement, we heavily consulted faculty groups in developing the framework for the ethics program, including going to our ethics department and having a very, very useful conversation with I believe the chair at that time of the ethics department. So the consultation also included, broadly faculty from and employees from all of the campuses, not just the Twin City campus. And the workshops that we plan on establishing will be available through Zoom. So will be available to individuals any of the campuses as well, not just the Twin Cities campus. So we really see this as a broad effort. And honestly, after after being inside with COVID so long, I welcome the chance to drive to Duluth and meet with people, or drive to Crookston and meet with people to give a in-person workshop on this topic. In terms of the ethics, the formal academic ethics training that takes place at the institution, and here there has been discussion about how this program will sort of interface with the subject matter experts that we have here. We're still working on that component through our Executive Oversight Compliance Committee. There's been different ideas put out by that committee on how that might look going forward, but we haven't landed on firm ground there yet. But I certainly look forward to someday coming back to this group with another update that would include more information in that regard.
Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Mr. Coomer. That answered both my questions. And just to recap, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here. I think this presentation has been helpful because in thinking of the program, I was having a hard time differentiating. We have EOA, we have U report, we have internal audit and ethics program, and I was trying to kind of place their different roles and whatnot. And what I'm hearing is while we have those different offices and more for handling investigations and addressing things like that, the ethics program is proactive in training and promoting the culture, not responding to things after the fact. Am I understanding that correctly?
Mr. Coomer?
Thank you, Chair Rocha, Regent Kenyanya. Yes, the idea from an effective compliance and ethics program is to always be proactive and get out there before an event occurs. But it is also a tool to use if you do have an event or something does happen, or when you're monitoring, you do see an opportunity for improvement, to go in and reinforce. And all of those programs that you mentioned, the training that they do, I would say those areas themselves are proactive as well. Yes, they do investigate allegations of non-compliance, but they are also proactive. They also have their own training, and they also have their own training that's used in remediation as well. What we want with this program is proactively, ideally, training people, all right, getting people comfortable to moving through a process of values-based decision making. So if they're going to make a decision on behalf of the university, that they get into the habit of mentally running through those core set of values at the very least, but ideally also their own professional standards for conduct and so forth as constraints to their actions, right? So we know that it's our goal to be a world-class research institution. But while we move towards that goal or work to maintain that what we've achieved, we're going to do so with honesty and integrity, with careful and responsible management of our resources, and with transparency. So those values are actually lanes that we want to operate in. And so our training is really to focus on that as well, so that people become comfortable making decisions running through those filters.
Thank you. Regent Kenyanya?
Yes, final one, Mr. Chair. So is there, if I'm a student, faculty member, staff member, or even regent, and something has occurred, I mean, is there a situation in which I'm coming to the ethics program? And if so, how do I determine where I go? Because there's several avenues, whether university and system wide, but even do I go to the department head? I mean, something happened, right? I mean, how do I determine who I need to take this issue to, and is the ethics program one of them?
Regent Kenyanya, if I can maybe try to help narrow the question a little. Are you
bring it to Regent Rocha, right?
That's right. That's right. Are you
okay?
Are you asking about whether you would go there for consultation or would you go there for action?
For action. I'm trying to clarify if it's one of the routes for action. Right.
Yeah, Mr. Coomer, could you respond to that, please?
Thank you. Yes, they could come to the compliance office if they had a belief that some unethical action took place that needed to be addressed. Whether that would be addressed by the compliance and ethics program or whether it would be put into some other pre-existing university process such as EOAA or the Office for Conflict Resolution or so forth would depend on the situation itself. But our office is always a place people can come if they have concerns about compliance or ethics issues.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Coomer.
Thank you. And this is an excellent. We're kind of up against the schedule here a little bit, but this is a great conversation. And that actually kind of comes back to Regent Davenport's initial question. When something there is a finding of some sort, does this program provide for an opportunity for that instruction training? And I think that's an excellent piece. And the number of questions and the breadth of the questions today, I think this is an area that we maybe could even get on the schedule again for additional conversation. I think Regent Hsu's question got a little bit to my question was related to have we caught up, being that this is a fairly recent creation at our institution compared to peer institutions. Have we caught up? The other item, and I'm not going to ask Mr. Coomer for a response on this, but it seems like we have the university is so complex and it's a big public and very important institution in the state, and we have all kinds of transparency obligations and so on. But we also have some of the most complex relationships, particularly when you talk about high dollar research. Where in a private entity, the company owns everything. At the university, we've got all kinds of mixed relationships between the researchers and other entities. And so at some point in time, I think it might be helpful to have a discussion about how this program fits within those complex relationships. And so, but we don't have time for that right now. Thank you very much, Mr. Coomer, for that presentation. And we'll move on to our last item here, the internal audit update. This is for discussion. And I'll turn to Chief Auditor Klatt. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Regent Rocha, members of the committee, student representatives, welcome. I would ask Regent Rocha to indulge me for 30 seconds because I so welcomed Regent Sviggum's comments about assurance. And so I just want to share that I'm an alumni of the Carlson School of Management before it was that. And when I was a student, auditing of any nature, internal or external, was not on my radar as a career option. I had other thoughts about what I might do with my life. But because of a number of circumstances, I actually ended up becoming an auditor. And as the person who recruited me, I told them the only thing I knew about auditing was how to spell it. And they said, don't worry about that. And the first conversation I had with a very just wonderful chief auditor as this brand new auditor was about assurance, and that's the sole purpose of the work that we do. And it's the lifeblood of an auditor. And so that's 40 some years ago. And each and every day, I think about assurance and how we do our work in order to provide it to you. And a year ago today, or a year ago at this meeting, you received a report on an external quality assurance review that was done of the audit function. And the primary purpose to have those reviews done is to have an assessment made on whether our governing boards and our leadership can place assurance on our work. And so, Regent Sviggum, that's why we come to work every single day, is to give you that assurance that the university is operating in the manner that you expect it to. So I just wanted to say thank you for being sensitive to the importance of assurance and whether you should be able to have it or not. on the work that you get from Deloitte and from us. And I think unequivocally that answer is yes. So thank you. Now I'll get on to my report.
Thank you.
Okay, so our progress on, and I'm going to use planned with the proverbial quotation marks because we don't have a plan this year, but you'll understand the allocation of our resources to intentional, I guess I would say, audit work is really, really good this year. We have produced a high quantity of work, quality work, and done that, and given the current remote working environment, which, you know, I just have to tell you, I look at the internal audit staff and what they have been able to produce in this period of time, and I'm just exceptionally proud of them and the efforts that they have made to keep audit work going and doing it in a really high quality way. So I hope you are as well. In terms of the follow-up on audit results or audit recommendations, which is in your docket material on page 161, we had a 27% implementation rate, which is significantly below our goal of 40%. And we had a little bit better than 40% at our last reporting period in October. In our interaction with folks who have outstanding recommendations, it was clear that the pandemic, as well as the impact of the retirement incentive option, had an impact as people needed to have shift responsibilities around because people left the unit, et cetera, et cetera. My staff indicates that they are very comfortable that the units are taking their audit findings seriously. They're making progress. They're taking appropriate action, albeit everyone acknowledges at a slower speed than what they anticipated to when they made the original commitments. So I think we can all want things to happen faster, but the right things are being done, which I think is important. 54% of the outstanding recommendations remaining after our follow-up are also past due. And again, I think that's a reflection on just the delays that people have experienced in being able to attend to things or to get certain actions taken. 5 units completed all their implementation of their outstanding items, so we give kudos to those 5. We have 1 unit that has recommendations that have been outstanding more than 2 years, and we provided more detailed information on what those items are and their current status on page 162 of your docket material. So that's the result of follow-up. President Gabel did issue a memo to her leadership team communicating her expectation that the implementation on audit recommendations would improve. And that's included in your docket material as well. We have information on the collaborative assessment of identity and access management and the progress that is being made in that regard on page 163 of your docket material. As we explained to the audit committee when we issued the report on that collaborative assessment, we are not doing specific follow-up in these follow-up reviews 3 times a year because of the nature of the findings and the work that needs to be done to address them. We will confirm and validate the progress being made on these items using just performing an additional audit of them as key milestones are communicated to us as being completed. And that will give us a more fulsome look at how that remediation is going. But there is really good material in the docket on actions that they have taken and progress that they're being made, that they're making on specific items within that collaborative assessment. Any questions on follow-up before I move on to new audit work?
Any questions, members of the committee? I'm seeing no indicators at this point.
Excellent.
Questions?
All right.
Yep. Oh, please continue.
During this period, we completed 12 audits and issued reports on those results. The list of those audits is on page 180 of your docket material. 2 of those audits involved transition reviews of changes in leadership positions. 2 were specifically focused on activities related to the pandemic. One of those was a very fulsome review of our adherence to the requirements in the receipt and distribution of the CARES funding. And we found really excellent compliance, and I think that helped prepare folks for the work that Deloitte did as well. So that was really an excellent audit effort. We had 7 audits of what I would consider regular ongoing university activities. And we had 1 audit that was focused on a very significant operational change that involved a significant amount of monetary resources, and that was the transfer of our retirement assets to Fidelity. And that there are employees' assets, and we wanted to make sure that all those assets transferred as the employee requested, and that all funds were accounted for. And the audit affirmed that both of those were in fact accomplished. We had of the audits that we issued, of the 12, 6 resulted in, or not 6, 10 resulted in evaluations that the control environment appropriately mitigated significant risks, as we equate that to a good rating. To Regent Sviggum's, can you give me a grade? So that's the good grade. And then we had 2 that were evaluated as being adequate. The first of those was UMarket, which is the university's e-procurement site. And in that audit, we did see that they had made notable progress in processing a greater percentage of university purchasing activities through that site, which is one of its objectives. We did identify, however, that it had areas in the area of information technology that warranted some shoring up, and considering it's an e-procurement site, information technology is a major driver. The second audit that resulted in an adequate rating was the OIT Application Development Unit. And we determined that they really have a very knowledgeable staff, and generally are undertaking their activities in a very responsible way. However, we did identify non-compliance with university policies, and that some of their control processes were not consistently enforced through appropriate oversight and supervision. So audit recommendations were made to improve on both of those attributes. We have 13 audits in progress, 1 being a collaborative assessment involving employee immigration. And I would say, as now, and certainly evident to us, but perhaps not to you, as we select audits for inclusion, for completion, we are really being thoughtful about how those activities, well, I don't know if it's a chicken or an egg type of thing, but we are really thinking about the strategic plan, Impact 25, and where activities happen that influence those strategic goals, and what audit coverage we can provide in order to inform leadership and the board about activities that have a direct relationship to that strategic plan. And as we are issuing reports on the audits that are kind of currently in process, I think you will see our trying to connect those dots for you in terms of the inclusion of the activity and how we see that impacts the strategic plan. So that's that. We did also 5 SNAP reviews, which we have talked to the committee about, our really short, brief audits focused on very targeted areas. 2 of those 5 specifically related to changes made in response to pandemic operations. All the results of the SNAP reviews were good. I do want to remind the committee that we have an open IT auditor position that will remain open considering the hiring freeze, and that is impacting the amount of work we can do in the IT portfolio of the university. And we're looking at other options for how we can get some of that resource that we need to continue to further that work. We will begin our audit planning efforts, our normal process around annual audit planning. We will reintroduce this year after taking a little hiatus last year because of the pandemic. I'll be talking to the board office to ask if regions want to be involved in having discussions around the risk assessment that informs that plan, and I would certainly encourage you to participate. They're very the conversations with governance are very helpful in informing our plan. And then we will bring forward a plan at our June meeting of the committee. And as I've told the committee on a couple of occasions, I love the accountability of a formal audit plan, but I've really also enjoyed, might not be the right word, but I've seen the value in not having one and being able to be more flexible and nimble. And so I'm working really and thinking very specifically about how I can kind of marry and blend the two and get the best of both. So I may be coming back to you with some ideas in May and see what kind of your tolerance is for how wild and crazy we might get. We won't get that wild and crazy, but just so that you understand what we're kind of thinking about. But there's been some real value in how we've approached the work this year. And I'd like to make sure that we can keep that while still having, you know, the means on which you can hold us accountable for how we use our resources, which the annual plan provides. So anyway, with that, I will close my comments and certainly take any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Auditor Klatt. Do we have any questions or comments from members of the committee? Again, I would also invite our student representatives. If you have any questions or comments, this would be a good opportunity as well. I am not seeing anybody indicating. I would point out that in our docket review, Regent Kenyanya and I had I think a good conversation with the auditor about the compliance shift this year, the number deviation from our normal expectation, and I think there are some very clear bases for that being unusual this year, and I think that the President's memorandum is a good statement of commitment from the President's office to get that back on track. So I think there's a comfort level despite our discomfort. So I think we're moving forward in a good way. Anyone? Not seeing any additional questions. That brings us to the end of the agenda today. Before we adjourn, I'll just remind everyone we have a short break right now, and then the Finance and Operations Committee meeting will begin promptly at 9:30 a.m. There being no additional business before the committee, we stand adjourned.